In this video, you're going to learn the process that I go through to learn about how to respond to C-bets out of position. Hey, how's it going? My name is Gareth James. Welcome back to MTT Poker School. If you're new to the channel, welcome to you as well. Now, before we get into today's video, I just want to remind you that we've recently partnered up with Simple Poker. So if you want 10% off any of their products, then check out the links in the description down below. Now, in the last video, link up here, I talked about the importance of being really focused and specific with your study. So today we're going to take a look at 40 big blinds, big blind versus button on 2 Broadway boards. I'm going to be using Simple GTO Trainer to go through 50 hands in this spot, and then I'll run through the errors and the mistakes to see what we can learn. So whenever I start learning a new spot like this, what I want to do first is look at what in positions c-betting strategy is supposed to look like. So I've opened up the Google Sheet here that is available in Module 3 of the MTT Game Changer course. If you're interested in that, check out the link in the description below. So what I've done here is filtered for 2 Broadway boards. So King 10-3, Queen 10 deuce, you can see Jack 10-6. So any boards with 2 Broadways in them, and I've filtered out any monotone boards. So we're just looking at flush draw and rainbow boards here. So as you can see, in position is supposed to go ahead and c-bet very frequently and does like to use the small sizing on these boards. Now, there are some boards where there's a lot more checking, so it's going to be interesting to see if we can learn about leading turns. And you can also see there's some big betting going on as well, betting 50% on these boards down at the bottom, and actually some over betting on King Queen 7 and some 3/4 pot on King Queen 9. So pretty interesting to see how we're going to respond. So the next step is to take a look at what we're supposed to do versus the most common bet size on these boards. So what we're going to do is have a look at the out of position spreadsheet. Now, you can get access to this Google Sheet through Module 4, playing out of position as a pre-flop caller. So what we're going to do then is versus the button and versus 25%. We're going to go through to this sheet, and you can see that it's already filtered for the 2 Broadway boards. If you want to look at any other board textures, we can do that here. You can see that our equity out of position, not too good in this spot. We're going to be continuing. If we have a look here, we just highlight all of this, go down here to average. We can see we're going to be continuing around 61% of the time. So we're going to be doing a decent amount of folding. You can see on many of these boards, we're folding almost 40% of the time. And we do a decent amount of raising here, raising on average 17% on these boards. So I think it's going to be really important to take note of a few things here. And this is something that I teach you in Module 4, all about being sensitive to bet size. So it's really important to look at our equity in this situation, but also to look at the bet size from our opponent, because the better our equity, the more we're going to continue. And the smaller the c-bet, the more we're going to continue. And then obviously the bigger the c-bet, the less we're going to continue, and the lower our equity, the less we're going to continue as well. So on these boards then, we're going to be continuing a decent amount of the time, as I said, around 60% versus the small bet. Be interesting to see what happens when we do face half pot, 3/4 pot bets and the over bets. But I think for the most part, we're just going to be facing quarter pot bets. And we're going to go now into GTO Trainer and start the session. Let's go. All right, so I've just got to the end of 50 hands. Just have a quick look through the EV loss column. You can see quite a lot of hands where we didn't lose anything, just very simple hero folds. So not going to lose anything when it's a very straightforward fold. Lost a little bit here, and as we scroll down, there was an error in here that we want to take a look at. We flopped an open-ender, Jack 9 on Queen 10-5. So have a look there, see what happens. There's another error here. Not too much EV loss, but it thinks it's an error, so definitely worth looking at that. There's another error here, minus 91, 92. Have a look at that as well. So one of the questions I had before I started this session was, am I check raising enough on the flop? We saw it earlier that we're supposed to do a decent amount of raising. And the thing is that the EV difference between raising and calling in a lot of these spots is actually pretty small. So it's not immediately going to be obvious if you're making the right plays. You're taking the right decisions or making the right decisions, taking the highest EV line, because the EV is so close in a lot of these spots on the flop. The biggest errors and the biggest losses of EV are going to come on the turn and the river. So let's now dive into some of those errors and biggest EV loss hands and see what we can learn. Okay, so let's scroll down to one of these errors, and here's the first one. Let's just see what happened. So we flopped a straight draw on Queen 10-5. We check, villain bets, and I went for the raise, and it says here calling is the highest EV option, but as I said before, the difference in EV is very, very small, and you can see here that it does raise 43% of the time and call 56%, so I think mixing absolutely fine. Villain goes ahead and calls, and on the turn, ace of hearts. I went for a small bet, and that's where the hand ended, and I got the error message that I should be checking in this spot. So let's have a look in Pio and see why we're supposed to be checking in this situation. All right, so on the ace of hearts, you can see that we're actually going for a pure check. Let's have a look at the EV comparison here. And you can see that we're going to be leading on a decent number of cards, but you can see also that a king and an ace, we want to go ahead and check very, very frequently. So let's have a look at our equity. And you can see that on an ace and a king, this is where our equity is the lowest. And that's why it's suggesting we should be doing some checking. You can also see a lot of checking happening on a 10-2, and the equity is lowest on a 10. So very interesting to see that on the turn, when our equity is the lowest, we want to do a lot more checking. But when our equity is decent, then we can continue to fire. So let's dive a little bit deeper. If we check here and our opponent decides to bet this small sizing, you can see that with the Jack-9, we are going to be continuing just with a call. We do have some raising hands, but mainly we're just going for the call here. And then we're going to fold those hands that we decided to check raise bluff on the flop that didn't improve on this turn card. All right, let's take a look at another error. So just a small one here. Let's just have a quick look through the hand. So villain checks back on this king queen 3 board, and we expect to see a lot of c bets happening on these types of boards, as we discussed before. So it's pretty interesting to see, okay, how do we respond on the turn? So we'll have a look at that in a minute. How do we respond on the turn versus a flop check back? How much probing are we going to be doing on a board that's still going to be pretty good for our opponent? So the turn was the Jack of diamonds. I checked again, which it likes, and the villain checks back. And then on the Jack of clubs, I went for 2/3 pot bet, and it looks like here he wants to just go ahead and check once again. So what we're going to do is have a look in Pio and see what we're supposed to do on the turn, and also what kind of hands are we going to go ahead and bluff on the river. Okay, so a quick look at the in-position player's strategy. You can see they do some checking, and you can see that Queen 5 suited, the hand that they had, getting checked at very high frequency. And this is something that you'll pick up from looking at various board textures. In this situation, if you're supposed to do a decent amount of checking on these boards, then the first candidates will be sort of top pair with the lowest kickers, second pair with the lowest kickers, and so on and so forth. So let's just have a look at that. And you can see that top pair with the lowest kickers does have some checking, second pair with the lowest kickers also getting some checks here, and you can see the offsuit King X hands as well with some checking. Okay, so on the Jack of diamonds, you can see that we don't do too much leading here. I think it's still a board that's great for our opponent, even though he's decided to check back. So we're not doing too much leading. Let's have a quick look in Range Explorer to have a look at what we are leading here. Let's start with nothing, and you can see that most of it is coming from flush draws. We'll get to those in a minute. Tiny bits of the backdoor flush draw as well, which is obviously, on the Jack of diamonds, there's 2 flush draws possible now. So that's where most of our leads are going to come from. If we just go down to flush draws, it's going to come from these weaker ones down here, but you can see like 3x of spades just wants to check. Jack X of spades wants to check, and then Queen X of diamonds wants to check. So a pair plus a flush draw, very happy to check, and then the other ones that don't have a pair, just going to go ahead and start leading, pretty much most of the time. Straight draws then, we're going to do some leading with pair plus a straight draw, as you can see from here, but then also some of these weaker 10x hands as well, but not too much. 4-out straight draws, again, doing a decent amount of checking, as you'd expect. The overall strategy here is to go ahead and check almost 80% of the time, so we're going to be checking a lot in this spot. Combo draws, decent amount of checking as well. Starting to bet some of these 10x and 9x hands down here, and the weakest ace-x as well. In terms of strong hands then, we actually check our strongest hands here, the nut straight and 10-9 here, also a straight. We're going to be doing a decent amount of checking there. We're We don't have any sets. Two pair, we're going to do a decent amount of checking as well. You can see us leading here. Queen Jack with the Queen of Diamonds betting a lot more frequently than any of the others. Top pairs then also mixing. Going to go ahead and bet sometimes, but also doing a decent amount of checking. And it seems to me like doing a lot more betting with the weakest King X hands here. I guess because we want to get value from our opponent's hands like Queen 10 and Jack 10. And if we have King 10, it's less likely that they have hands like that. Second pairs, decent amount of checking. You can see here betting with second pair and a gut shot, second pair and an open-ender. But yeah, so overall, just quite a lot of checking here. And I think it's maybe a common mistake, common misconception here that as soon as your opponent checks back, you can just fire on the turn. And it's really important to recognize that the equities probably haven't shifted too much. So let's have a look at that. So you can see in positions equity is still really, really high here. We know it's going to be high for them on a 2 Broadway board on the flop. When it goes check, check, they still have really good equity here. And our equity, as you can see, not so good. All right, so on the Jack of clubs then, let's have a look at what we're supposed to be betting here. And you can see we're going for the big size, which is 2x pot with trips here. We're going for the slightly smaller size, which is the 2/3 pot bet with top pair, well, I guess 2 pair, kings and jacks here. And then taking this even smaller size with the queens, so 2 pair, queens and jacks. And even doing some really small betting with the 3x here as well. Let's take a look at what our bluffs are supposed to look like in this spot. So you can see hands that are really nothing. A lot of these 2x hands getting bet. You can see some 4x hands here as well. But our hand 7-6 off, you can see he just wants to go for a check. I guess if we're going to be betting all of these, we're just going to be way over bluffing and pretty easy to play against. I think our opponent's range consists of a lot of showdown value hands at this stage, and we'll just be able to pick off the bluff. So, you know, we want to be able to value bet some hands here. Obviously, we're going to be betting big with our jacks. We're going to be betting slightly smaller with our kings and even smaller with Queen X and 3x. So we want to be able to bluff in these spots as well. And you can see like 9-4 of spades here does just want to go for the 2x pot. Let's take a look at some other hands. Ace high, it's going for a check, has enough showdown value. Tiny amount of small betting here, just 10% pot with these 3x hands. Second pair going for this, either the 10% or the, I guess it must be 25% on the river. And then as we said before, top pairs going for the bigger bet. You can see here 2/3 pot, and then trips going for the 2x pot. Straights doing a decent amount of checking here, which is pretty interesting to see. Boats going for, you know, much bigger bets. You can see the 2x pot or the 2/3 pot in this spot, and we don't have any quads because we would have 3-bet jacks pre-flop. All right, and then let's have a look at this last one. Jack 9 on a king queen deuce board. So we checked, villain bets quarter pot, and I decide to call, and it looks like it's doing that most of the time, 84%, raising 15%, so there's a little bit of raising going on here. Then the turn is the 10 of diamonds, and I decide to lead, and it's happening a tiny amount of the time, but really we just want to go for a check. Villain then raises to 8.4 bigs, and we call, and you can see that we should have just jammed here. River is the king of spades, and I checked, and then we got the error message, and we should be leading here for 6.5 bigs most of the time. So let's have a look at what the strategy looks like and why we should be leading this river. Okay, so on the flop, we faced this small bet, and let's just hover over Jack 9 off. And as you can see, Jack 9 with the Jack of spades getting raised a lot more frequently in this spot, just has a little bit more equity. Let's just have a look. You can see that Jack 9 with the spade has almost 3% more equity. So it just wants to push that a little bit more. We did just go for the call. Turn was the 10 of diamonds. And as you can see on this board, we don't really do too much leading at all, 3%. And I think if we ran this sim for much longer, this would go pretty much to 0. So we'd be pretty much checking range here. Let's have a look at some other turn cards. We'll just see if maybe a queen or a deuce gets led at some frequency. So a queen for sure, and a deuce gets led here a decent amount of the time. But the 10 of diamonds, as you can see, or any 10 in this spot, is just going to be a check. So if we did check and our opponent who had Jack 9 of spades goes ahead and bets 7-3-1, this is where we are just going to go ahead and raise or jam. It's a pretty straightforward way to play this hand, and I think it's nice to see things just, you know, keeping it simple with a straight here. We did lead though, and then Jack 9 of spades, as you can see, did go for the raise, and then we can see, you know, if we were going to go for a check jam or a check raise on the turn, then when we lead and get raised, we just want to continue with the aggression and just jam here with Jack 9 off. We did just call though, King of Spades on the river. And again, you can see we shouldn't really be getting to this spot with Jack 9 off, but if we do, then we want to go ahead and bet 650. So if we bet 650 here, and then you can see Jack 9 of Spades jams, it still wants us to call with Jack 9 off. Let's just see what Pio is bluffing in this spot. You can see a bit of Jack 8 off here with the spade, and then some Ace X hands here with the Ace of Spades blocker. So if you don't think the population is going to be bluffing in this spot, then I think bet folding is pretty reasonable. Let's just see if our opponent does ever raise worse. And you can see trips here not getting raised, so it's not like it's a really bad mistake to fold here. You know, if we don't think our opponent's bluffing and they're not raising with worse, then we can make a pretty comfortable fold with the Jack 9. All right, that's going to wrap things up for this video. Just a quick reminder from me then, if you are interested in any of the products discussed in this video, then make sure you check out the links in the description down below. But if you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button right now. I'm going to be back in a few days with a brand new video, but until then, guys, take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.